My name is Muwafaq Wafi. This book, which I published recently, is for those open-minded readers who are willing to explore new concepts and potentially challenge their existing beliefs. I imagined having a special glasses to see the processes in the physical appearances of objects. I see processes in each thing interacting and communicating with other processes in everything, and everything start revealing its secrets. I see that everything in the universe is a result of processes and interactions ranging from the processes happening within the human brain that give rise to thoughts and consciousness to the complex interactions within ecosystems that define how life flourished. I have a deeper understanding of the infinite complexity present in the universe that encouraged me to explore challenging topics and try to find rational answers to them. Can the mind activities be explained within the realm of the physical world? What is life and what transpires when we pass away? What is the connection between our existence and the vastness of the whole universe? This book is of 11 chapters, presented in two parts. Part 1 deals from chapter 1 to chapter 7 deal with the mind. Part 2 from chapter 8 to 11 deal with life and the universe. In chapter 1, part 1, many of you have seen the film The Matrix, which opened in theaters in 1999, depicting a dystopian future in which humanity is unknowingly trapped inside the matrix, a simulated reality that intelligent machines have created. The Matrix film's intelligent machine, which is of course a sophisticated computer, was the mind of a demon that imitate reality as many thinkers doubted to be in the past centuries, and most likely there's some people who believe in that until today. Like the thinker, who have that thought and doubt is René Descartes, the philosopher and mathematician. He asked with doubt, how can we know that our existence is not a product of a malevolent demon's deceit? Eventually, he came with the statement, cogito ergo sum, that is in Latin, of course, translated to English, I think, therefore I am. One thing, actually, this statement is self-reference, so it is false. I mean, you don't refer to the same statement, to prove it is true. One thing, actually, why in the time and until today, maybe some people believe in this statement that actually approve of our existence independently. This actually is due to the thinking of people at the time, actually, who believe in the Platonic idealist idea of mind, which is a supernatural phenomenon, and in a body, which is a physical body, natural body. and that actually belief become part, actually central part of the doctrine in Christianity. And so the first actually phrase in the New Testament, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word actually is the concept, the principle, the pure thought of God. Actually, God is thinking, a mind, a thinking mind, when he can create the physical world from his thoughts. Okay, now we have actually a thinking God creating the world, and we have a human being, which is the creation of God, thinking. Of course, he will have a mind, and the thinking prove his existing, the creation of God. That statement was mended, let's say, or actually with a thinker called A. Thomas, and he came with the statement, "Dobito ergo cogito ergo sum." I doubt, therefore I think, therefore I am. I mean, the doubt with the thinking proof of the statement that actually we have independent mind. The mind can be understood as a closed world of immaterial processes, complemented by the input it receives from the material world through the senses. The mind is closely linked to emotion. Emotions, and the emotions are linked to the physical reality. So which is actually our physical body. In that chapter, actually, I mentioned how the materialists think of the mind, and the Marxist and existentialism think of the mind. The materialist reduces, especially in the last 2 centuries, actually, reduces the mind activity to mere physical actions driven by cause and effect. Actually, they think actually that the thinking process, the thinking actually thoughts are just like the secretion of glands, the secretion of the mind. Yeah. The Marxists actually refuse this view, and called that materialist the philosophy as a vulgar materialism. But the Marxists, of course, focus on the mass struggle on the expenses of the mind independent. So there is a plus or minus, of course. While actually the existentialism philosophy focus on the individual and the mind of the individual, but leave the person alone facing the burden of his freedom. In chapter 2, what is knowledge? Well, we know that the mind makes knowledge from learning and experiences. So what is knowledge? In short, knowledge is memorized thoughts, perceived impressions, and learned skill. Knowledge, there's 3 types of knowledge. The first type, we call it knowledge by acquaintance, identified when you know a person by sight or a place by sight. And the second is the propositional knowledge or know-how type of knowledge. Actually, type of knowledge expressed in word, symbols, or drawings. The third type is what is known as know-how type of knowledge. That is learned skill knowledge that cannot be expressed in words, like walking, talking, driving a car, for instance. We talk about the know-how type of knowledge in terms of algorithm of know-how type of knowledge. So what is algorithm actually? Algorithm is a process or set of rules to be followed in calculations or other problem-solving operations, especially by computer. The skills learned by a person is like it's a kind of algorithm printed in some place in the brain, which is similar to the innate instinct and life-supporting functions like instincts, emotions and things, and life support like breathing, and heartbeat, in terms of their automatic response to stimuli. Knowledge of a quantity is like a skill as well, but that skill actually deal only with the memory. One important issue is that actually, it doesn't show her actually, but it is here. Yeah. Knowledge by quantities, as I said, yes. Yeah. Instinct and life-supporting systems functions can be regarded as inborn know-how knowledge associated with bodily function. This is very important to remember actually, that they are actually like know-how type of knowledge, but actually we inherit it. It's not learned during life. Yeah. So this is conclude chapter 2. In chapter 3, which is titled What Development in the Human Brain Facilitated the Mind, we start with this illustration of the human brain. The human brain actually, mainly there's 3 parts of the human brain. The first part is the cortex. This is the cortex. The larger part is to occupy, to get a highly evolved mammals, have the cortex, which occupy 2/3 of the human brain, and associated with the mind functions, which include memory, attention, perception, cognition, awareness, thought, language, and consciousness. And the second part, which is nearly here, all this part, is the Hindi brain or the reptilian brain, which is the oldest and most primitive component of the brain. It is associated with instinctive and involuntary body function. It includes the spinal cord, medulla, bones, and cerebellum. This is cerebellum here. Yeah. The third part is the deep limbic system or emotional brain. It is actually, as you said, from its name, it's deep. Doesn't show here because it's inside. And this component of the brain deals with emotions, memories, and arousal or stimulation, and include amygdala, hypothalamus, thalamus, hippocampus. The amygdala and hippocampus have special role in making memory, which we will deal with it later on. There are species collective function which almost completely control the behavior of the member. Actually, this what I call it species collective member function is actually those two part, which is the hindbrain and the limbic system. So I mean, I call them the collective function, which almost completely control the behavior of the species, because actually it deals with the species itself, its survivability. Okay. There is, of course, with the development of the cortex, the human developed another kind of individualistic tendency. I mean, promotes the awareness of what we identify as personal identity, which has an interest in promoting the well-being of the individual, even sometimes on the expenses of the group. So within the time of development of the cortex and the consolidation of the cortex, eventually there was a conflict between the species collective function and the individualistic tendency, human individual tendency. Eventually, with the development of civil society and groups into cities and the civilization, basically, the start of civilization, the HIT become actually in control, almost control, the behavior of the human being with the apparent, of moral values and such things, within the human individual tendency, there will come, there's as well as conflict between social legacy. I mean, society usually develop, some kind of laws and tradition and all those things, and the new concept which is carried out by people like reformists or even what we call them prophets and so on. And with time actually that actually fueled the social progress and shaped the course of human history. There is always that as well, a kind of dialogue between the HIT and the SCF, and a kind of conflict which is in terms of yes, actually, in terms of because the HIT will usually a human being is connected to a human being and will die eventually, and that actually worried the human being always during the history, while actually the SCF is immortal, since actually to represent the species, and as long as the species is still alive actually as a whole, it is immortal. So that actually, I mean, that SCF have got a language, it have emotions, and that emotion is expressed, one of the emotions expressed by the HIT, which have the language capability and things by as a spirituality. So the emergence of expression of spirituality in the form of religion and mystical orders. Now we come to chapter 4. I started this chapter with a section dealing with the computer development, the normal computer, the neural computer, the machine learning, pattern recognition, and eventually the artificial intelligence. I'm not going to deal with it in this presentation. You can read about it in my book, or actually you can have it, from any other source, from the internet maybe. I'm going to start with a brief on the human brain working mechanism. here actually is a photo of the unit cell which makes the human brain network. Yeah, here is the neural cell. This is the body with the nucleus. This is what they call it, the axons, which pass electricity in one direction. Those are connected to other neural cell. They call them the dendrites. They end up with hundreds of each one of with hundreds of what they call synapses. The synapses are responsible of passing the electrical current from one cell to the other, and this is actually enlarged synapses. So the electrical current, the triggered electrical current excites some glands here, which eventually form ions, potassium ions, which are double charged, which will pass through a media which is a kind of oily medium, passes electrical charges, to the other cell, and when the electrical charge reach to a stage, the voltage, it will trigger electrical current, which will pass through the axon, and the process will continue until the current becomes so weak, so they cannot trigger, other cells. There is approximately 10 to the 11 neurons in the brain. There's on average 7,000 synapses connection to other neurons. An adult, an estimated ranging from 10 to the 14 to 5 multiply 10 to the 14 synapses connections. Now we come actually about the brain code. This photo actually here shows actually some neuron interconnections triggered, and the green part is actually the electrical current passing through it, which looks like a kind of pattern. And what I'm suggesting here actually that this pattern represents a code in the brain. I mean, what else? We can't say it is actually a supernatural phenomenon. What happened in the brain is within the brain itself. So that is actually my suggestion. Actually, this is in comparison with the computer. Actually, we have a programmer, let's say a human programmer, who write a program in high-level language like BASIC or C, and so pass it to a compiler or actually interpreter, which will change it to an assembly language, a simple language, and the assembly language will be interpreted into binary code, binary code, 0 1s, a group of zeros of one, will be passed to the computer CPU, central processor unit, because the central processor unit cannot understand high-level language. It has to be in terms of numbers. So the CPU will take each group of them, which represent a command, and execute it. The human being, the perception through lobes actually, like, for instance, occipital, which is, visual things, it will go to the brain, and the brain will translate it into triggered patterns, and the pattern or the triggered neuron in the brain can be considered the brain codes. Of course, this claim of mine need to a genuine scientific investigation, and as we think actually that the pattern can represent different types of information, maybe some kind of language code translated into patterns, or some visual things or emotions. We don't know. I mean, it's too early to think what that's represent, you know. In the same chapter, you know, we deal with how are codes imprinted into the brain. I mean, the code imprinted in the brain, it is go to the memory actually. What is the memory? How the memory is made, you know. The memory are permanent patterns, actually like etched into, let's say, brain. Actually, they are they form actually least electrically resistive paths. So I mean, so they, I mean, let me explain that, you know, a little bit more. Imagine there is a kind of hill, and you pour water from the hill, and eventually the water will etch its pattern of which passes through it. So next time you pour water, the water will go through. Eventually, mostly actually, will go through those etched channels, you know. So those etched channels in the brain is the least electrically resistive paths. The information which eventually become part of the memory is those patterns which have least electrically resistive paths. That is due to the dendrites become strengthened, so they will pass electricity more easily. You know, the process of remembering is actually from like looking to something and you try to remember who is that person. Is a reverse process in which a pattern would be passed to the brain, and there's a kind of process which is like pattern recognition process. How memory are made? That's part. And there's three stages in making memory. The first stage is what we call the sensory memory. It is literally a literal thing which we, let's say, see. I mean, for instance, if you look to something, close your eyes, you will see the thing which you just seen just in your mind, which will last a second or two, you know, and then disappear. The second part we call the short-term memory. What you have heard or seen will stay in the memory for, let's say, few minutes maybe. Unless, of course, you strengthen it by repeating it. For instance, somebody tell you his telephone number, and you try to remember it, to repeat it in your mind so many times so that they can remember it. You know, you strengthen that. So, and that is, as I said, will last about you know, maybe 3-4 minutes. And then the thing which will stay in memory, it is actually in the long-term memory. In the long-term memory, that patterns which happen actually, I mean, because of you want to have this to stay in the memory, whether you voluntary or involuntary, you want it, you know, it become part of the memory. There's two parts actually which would help to do this. The hippocampus, and in cooperation with the amygdala. And if you see actually here actually that the memory is distributed on the lobes, which is in charge of, you know, things. It is, the memory is not like a film which you go through it, you know, sequentially. Actually, for instance, if you see, let's say, an accident, a car accident, which is very troubling to you, and have, you know, some emotion about the victim of it, you know, and that actually will stay in your memory. So what happened actually, the visual things will go to the occipital lobe. Other part like the the language or the noise and everything will go the temporal lobe, and so on. And of course, that will be as well with emotional charge, it would be stored, So invoking the memory of this incident from, let's say, something you've seen and remind me by it, So, I mean, it will, like a pattern recognition, I said, which will come with the emotion which was with it to some extent, In chapter 5, which is titled, Is the Mind the Software of Supercomputer, Its Hardware Being the Brain? I started with seeing actually that many functions can be simulated by the computer. For instance, in the where actually most of the mind is actually in the cortex, the functions of the cortex. For instance, the occipital lobe can be regarded as, can be simulated by a graphic card. The temporal lobe, which is for learning, memory, hearing, and language, can be as well partially, simulated by a computer program and hardware and software. Like, for instance, now the artificial intelligence is doing very well with language simulation. The peripheral, which is for sensation, perception, spatial reasoning as well. Many of the functions can be simulated by computer. Knowledge, of course, how knowledge is stored in computer isn't stored in terms of what we know as knowledge base and expert systems. So knowledge-based system and expert system. Basically, in a very simple way, without going in details, you have a system which will store data, first of all, which is those green balls. Data will call fact, actually. And then you store the links between them, which is that line which is linking one to the other. And then you invent some rules which will help. Rule like, for instance, if A father of B, then B son of A. And then you have a mechanism, intelligent mechanism of search. So you put a question and you have an optimal path to the answer, and you have the answer. This is a very simple, of course, way of, I mean, you have many expert systems which you can buy from the market and then fill it with information, the knowledge representation in the brain is much, of course, complex, because simply the brain is a complex neural network, which I can imagine it as if it is a tree structure in which actually the old information and knowledge is stored near the trunk, while actually the recent one is, let's say, stored near the leaves of the tree. The frontal lobe, one of the main function of the frontal lobe is reasoning. So what is really reasoning? Reasoning is defined okay. Let's see. Reasoning actually is defined as, continually defined as association, categorization, cause and effect, problem solving, organization, generalization, and judgment of safety. Yeah. So actually, if you can see actually many of those functions, reasoning, like association, categorization, many of them actually any computer software engineer know actually that you can make a program which simulate those functions. For instance, here I actually have a basic actually flow chart of a program, or a small part of a program, which simulate the cause and effect. The cause and effect is simulated by the if statement. If a cause A true, A, let's say the cause is A greater than B, then go to 19. This is 19. If not, actually, it will go through. So, I mean, many of those are actually can be simulated by computer. So where is the human being in all this? I mean, if the mind actually mostly can be simulated by computer, and what happened actually to the humanity and the human? I mean, let's go back to the mind as a neural network. You know, the brain itself as a network process information as a whole pattern that may represent multiple information aspects. Well, actually, in our computer, actually, usual computer, the process of formation is in sequence. Brain is a neuron pattern may undergo changes and iterations during the person's lifetimes. Well, actually, the computer program is fixed, unless, of course, the computer programmer go back and try to mend it, and do something with it, The secret of the mind's creativity and imagination may lay in the new cortex, which is actually development from the cortex of the human being, pattern alteration, integration, and truncation capability. And let's just explain that in more an example, let's say. Imagine actually that you have a picture in your mind, a writer have a picture in his mind of a horse. You know what is a horse is, how it looks. And you have another something in his memory of a horn of, let's say, the croc of an antelope, let's say. And what he actually, the two patterns will be mixed together, become an imaginary horse with a horn that, what do you call it, unicorn, imaginary, mythical horse, This is the kind of things. So when we think about the humanity, what defines the human being, it is not the mind itself, but it is the close association between the mental activities and emotional activity, as we notice actually from this example and the previous, display. I mean, civilization is not made by the mind alone. Civilization is made by this collaboration. Actually, the mind, to some extent, let's say, never mind. Okay, thank you. And now, actually, we go to chapter 6. How much knowledge can the mind accommodate? Of course, this is it's an impossible question and to answer, how much knowledge. But, knowing actually, now actually we established that the internal pattern in memory, that memory, the knowledge actually is stored in memory as neuron pattern, if you remember, of least resistivity to electricity. So the question becomes really how many patterns the memory part of the brain can accommodate. The conclusion, in the chapter, I put some kind of mathematical simulation as well. That ideas and impression as interneural pattern memory almost unlimited. Consequently, the memory's capacity for knowledge is almost infinite. That brings to my mind actually a line from a poem by Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib in Arabic, of course. وتحسب أنك جرم صغير وفيك انطوى العالم الأكبر. That translates roughly as, and you think you are only a small germ in this world, but inside you folded the whole world. Thank you. This is the 6th chapter. The 7th chapter, do we have free will? Of course, this riddles and these things actually which puzzled humanity for generation and generation. In this chapter, actually, I put in a kind of 3 main sections. The free will in the supernatural kind that we believe actually, those people actually basically the religion, actually religious people. The free will in the naturalist camp, people who don't believe in the supernatural, and a suggested solution. In the supernatural camp, I deal with the Abrahamic religions. Let me see. Yes. The Abrahamic religion, of course, is dominated by the central belief in the duality of supernatural, natural world, and the soul body. The human soul that is believed to be the source of life and probably free will. In Judaism, tradition depicts God as intricately involved in the unfolding of history. So, I mean, basically, there's no free will. God is doing everything on the human life, actually. In Christianity, there's 2 trends of thought: the total human depravity of the Calvinism, which means to some extent that God, control everything. There's no free will, and the partial human depravity of Arminianism has a limited free will. In Islam and during the Abbasid Empire, which is actually from 750 to 1031, 2 trends of Islam: free will Islam, which is advocated by the Al-Mu'tazila, in which they say that there is a free will, they're called the Qadar, which means the destiny, that we are actually in control of our destiny. And the fatalist Islam, which is advocated by the Hanbali, strict Orthodox Islam, who don't believe in free will, and they believe in predestination, Jabr. They were actually intensely debated, and each side actually supported its claims by verses from the Quran. The issue of free will was resolved by somebody called Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, who said actually that Allah commands in the Quran the righteous path to take, and we decide whether to take it or not by our free will. So this issue in Islam, but if you think of it actually, with the belief in caring, benevolent creator, the free will becomes redundant, and earthly life becomes a transitory stage to the eternal life, afterlife. The purpose of earthly life is to test one's submissiveness to the Creator. The consequence of such a belief is shutting down the mind's reasoning door and capitulating to the religious jurisprudence. Yeah. In the materialist camp, those actually who believe the existence of the natural world only, there's no supernatural, of course. The mind is manifestation of brain activities. This is what they say. The natural world, the physical world, is ruled by deterministic laws. Look, those are physics. So that actually lead to the to the conclusion there's no free will. Free will obsolete. Some hope came actually with the development of quantum theory, that uncertainty principle, which said there is a kind of unknown in the intrinsic, actually, we cannot know really. There's a kind of some kind of unknown in the, so that actually that free will, which allow actually that free will to that actually that the free will is that gap between the action, the cause, and its effect, which is unknown, and that actually within the brain's microstructure can give rise to the free will. But that actually view is actually lead me to think actually why indeterminism and randomness and nature add to the confusion actually in making clear decisions or performing action intimately. So I mean that is actually I refuse such a thing actually about the uncertainty principle. The suggestion come actually, first of all, we have to define what is free will. Free will in philosophy and science refer to the supposed power or capacity of a human to make decision or make action independently of any prior event or state of the universe. Therefore, actually, from definition, free will is a mental issue. It's not actually to do with action. I think it is actually decision which we make in our mind. And when the mind is freed from such interferences, whether external or internal, the decision-making process becomes guided solely by reason. And the mind has the capacity to make many reasonable choices and decisions. Of course, so we have free will, but are we sure that our decision isn't influenced by emotions? I have, again, about the free will and Marxism and existentialism philosophy. I'm not going to mention it here. It's a bit long. Thank you. This end up this section.